Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Democratic Party wraps up its convention in Chicago. We talked with some of the regional delegates. Ocean City is reeling from the death of a 2-year-old after being struck by a tram on the boardwalk. We also have an exclusive interview with former Governor Larry Hogan, who is running for the U.S. Senate in Maryland, and the Maryland Folk Festival is just around the corner. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The Democratic National Convention marked the beginning of a new era in politics as their presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, addressed the gathering this week in Chicago. In short, it represented the emergence of new political forces within the party, and Harris was a stark departure from previous nominees. Maryland Delegate Jared Shabline.
She gives representation to communities that have historically not been represented. She'll be the first president of South Asian descent in our country's history. She'll be our second black president. She'll also be our first female president. And I think that means a lot to so many people who have looked for our federal government and begged for representation and just haven't got it.
And playing second to Harris was the rather folksy governor, Tim Walz, who appeared on stage dispensing the wisdom of rural America. Delaware Governor John Carney came to know Walz over the years as a fellow governor.
I love Governor Walz. He's a very good friend. We serve in the U.S. House together. He is what he seems to be. He's as authentic as they come. He likes to have fun. He loves his family. He's from a small town in Nebraska, moved to Minnesota. My nephew plays for the Minnesota Vikings, so I go out there frequently, and there's a term referred to as Minnesota nice. And Governor Walz is absolutely Minnesota nice. He obviously incredibly complimentary with that perspective to the vice president, coming from one of the coasts and more of an urban area. He's from the middle of the country, and he's just so authentic, and that's what he's all about. He's just as good as there is in America.
And then there was the appearance of President Joe Biden, whose political career stretched back into the early 1970s. In many ways, his history was a history of a changing American landscape, eventually ushering in a far more progressive agenda than in times past. Delegate Sarah McBride, who is running for Delaware's lone congressional seat, has gotten to know him over the years.
Monday night was incredibly special as the arena came together to celebrate Joe Biden, to thank him for his lifetime of service to the state of Delaware, to the country, to express our gratitude for his historically selfless and patriotic decision to pass the baton to the next generation of leadership in the Democratic Party, and of course to express our pride in the transformational presidency.
As the party now heads into the fall, it carries a wide-ranging coalition. In short, McBride believes that the country is moving into a new era.
I think the country is hungry to move past the pettiness and the bitterness of Donald Trump. I think the country is eager for a new generation of leadership that fosters and renews our sense of hope as a country. And that's what we have in Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but it's also what we have across the country. It's what we have in Delaware in 2024 with the opportunity to elect Lisa Blunt Rochester to the United States Senate. It's one of the reasons why I'm running for the United States House of Representatives, to bring that new generation of leadership.
Delegate Sarah McBride at the Democratic National Convention. We now turn to local news, and in our studio, Susan Canfora, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don.
So, Susan, a 2-year-old was hit and killed by one of the trams on the boardwalk in Ocean City. And, of course, the community is reeling from the accident. What do we know?
Yes, this is just a heartbreaking story. The trams, or the trolleys that carry visitors and locals up and down the Ocean City boardwalk, have been stopped, and service has been discontinued while the Ocean City Traffic Safety Unit investigates the death of a 2-year-old boy who was hit by a tram Tuesday night. The boy was struck on Dorchester Street and pronounced dead at the scene. After the accident, the tram conductor stayed right there at the scene, and the police closed off part of the boardwalk. Of course, this is heartbreaking not only for the parents, but also for the community. And Ocean City Mayor Rick Meehan, Salisbury City Council President Deshaun Dowdy posted about it on his Facebook page, saying he is keeping the family in his prayers and asking for strength and comfort during this difficult time. By the next day, a memorial for the toddler had been set up on the boardwalk at Dorchester Street with stuffed animals and balloons and flowers in his memory. Delmarva Public Media's Brian Shane.
This incident occurred basically right in front of a concrete planter that holds a small tree. and people have started a makeshift memorial. It's a little pile of stuffed animals that's been placed on top of that planter. To call it heartbreaking is an understatement. This is the worst possible outcome for any family that comes to the beach, and the community is showing on social media and in person that everyone's hearts are going out to this family.
Ocean City Mayor Rick Meehan immediately issued a statement saying the town is closely knit and the residents' and guests' hearts go out to the family of this little boy. He said, "We share in their grief. We are committed to supporting this family and taking all necessary measures to prevent such tragedies in the future."
I also understand Ocean City leaders have lifted the moratorium on the cannabis-related businesses within the city limits. What are we looking at now?
Yes, the Ocean City officials have adopted an ordinance that establishes where cannabis dispensaries can open in the resort. But interestingly, there isn't any wording in the ordinance about whether or not they can do business on the busy boardwalk. Early this week, town council members agreed on guidelines, voting unanimously. You might recall marijuana was legalized for recreational use in July 2023, but the town had a moratorium on allowing the sale of cannabis in town limits. This week, though, at their council meeting, they talked about it again, and they unanimously agreed they would closely follow Maryland state law. That means dispensaries have to be at least 100 feet from an area that is residentially zoned, 500 feet from primary and secondary schools, and also 500 feet from daycare centers, churches, temples, and other places of worship, parks, playgrounds, and even libraries. As far as we know, the town has not received any applications yet to open dispensaries in Ocean City. Meantime, in Delaware, state officials began taking applications for the recreational marijuana program on Monday, and they will continue accepting those applications until September 30th. Then, licenses will be granted in November, and that will be through a lottery process regulated by the State Office of the Marijuana Commissioner. A total of 125 licenses will be granted for the 60 cultivation, 30 for manufacturing, 5 for testing, and then 30 for retail stores. So we'll let you know when we find out about those applications.
And of course, the Wicomico County Council is looking at a budget request for renovating the old Ward Museum building that will become the home of the new Wicomico County Public Library. What do we know about that? Some interesting questions, but it looks as if they're going to go ahead.
Yes, they're going to go ahead. The Wicomico County Council heard a request for funding from the library's executive director this week, but the council decided not to grant that request quite yet, at least not until mid-September. Seth Hirschberger, who heads the library, asked the council to approve a budget amendment and advance $330,000, taking the money from the FY26 budget to start design work. And that design work would be on the plan to move the library from downtown to the site of the former Ward Museum near Shoemaker Pond. A Maryland State Library grant of $3 million is expected, but Council President John Cannon said the council wants to be sure that grant money is coming before they do anything in advance. Hirschberger said, "Let's get the money now so we can do the design work ahead of time, and then we can start on this work right away." Wicomico Public Library Executive Seth Hirschberger was asked about the conditions of the existing building.
We've also conducted a study of the mold in the building and found that there is mold that will have to be remediated, but it's actually not as bad as we were concerned about. It's just limited to some areas, some limited areas of the building that will need to be addressed, and it's concentrated in the areas that will be most demolished and renovated. So we're working with the architect on what to do about that and the timeline of when to remediate the mold. We also know that the main unit of the HVAC is not operating, but that there are some sections of the building where there is HVAC that is operating, and we are running those in order to keep the humidity in the building down.
John Cannon said the council is going to go through with the project, and the council is not reluctant. They just want to make sure they get the money. The plan is for the main library downtown to move to the site of the former Ward Museum and also keep a smaller branch downtown.
There's also some good news from the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. What are we hearing from them?
We're hearing that Marshy Hope Creek and the Delaware headwaters got a pretty good grade when the annual report of the health of the Nanticoke River was released. That grade was a B-, making those the healthiest areas. The Nanticoke Watershed Alliance released its report, and that report evaluated the health of the river And that 64-mile-long river is a tributary of the Chesapeake Bay. It runs through Kent and Sussex counties in Delaware, and it forms the boundary between Dorchester and Wicomico counties. Beth Wasden, the deputy director of the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance.
In particular, the lower Nanticoke region, which is basically from Riverton down all the way to the mouth of the Nanticoke, continued to show improvements. And we saw that from our 15-year report card, which came out last year. So that region has really been improving over time. The other great story is that nitrogen grades in most of the watershed, so all of the regions except for two, scored higher than Fs. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but typically 4 of those regions are scoring Fs. So to have 4 out of 6 scoring higher than that shows that we had a reduced amount of nitrogen in the waterways last year. And we also had some pretty spectacular rainfall events, and we didn't see as much or as many phosphorus spikes as we could have. So overall, it was a pretty good year for the river last year. But year to year, we never know what we're going to see, so it's looking more at a trend.
The report was released after samples of water were taken from March until November. The pH was measured, as well as oxygen levels and water clarity. Tests determine if nitrogen and phosphorus are too high, because if they are, that can lead to algal blooms, and those blooms hurt the sea life. Also graded were the lower Nanticoke, which got a B-, but improved in the past 9 years, and upper Nanticoke, Broad Creek, and Lower Creeks, those all got Cs. Marshy Hope's nitrogen grade improved from an F in 2022, and this year Lower Nanticoke and Lower Creeks showed better results in phosphorus and chlorophyll levels than they had in the past.
Also, up in Millsboro, they're looking at, of course, the development of that bypass, but they're still concerned about those trucks that could move through the center of town.
When it comes to the new Millsboro bypass, which is now under construction, the frequently asked question is, will the tractor trailers carrying live chickens with feathers flying everywhere through town, will they still come through town on their way to Mount Air Farms just east of town? Will they still go through town, or will they take that bypass? That question came up, as it has been for months, during an informational meeting about progress on the bypass last week. And the Delaware Department of Transportation, known as DelDOT, sent a civil engineer, George Pierce, to the Millsboro Town Hall, and he told the audience, not to their liking, that there will not be a no trucks through town stipulation. Implementing a no trucks through town rule is on the radar, he said, but the problem is enforcing it. It's an enforcement issue that puts a lot of pressure on the local police, he said. It's a constant battle, but there will be no reason for trucks to go through town, so the first step is to build it and see how it works, he said. Pierce said he's worked for DelDOT 16 years, and he and other engineers and the people who are building the bypass live there. They live in Millsboro, so they have the same questions and problems as the residents do. A lot of the problems you bring up are problems we bring up internally, so we're not operating on an island here, he said, and his comments were at an informational meeting hosted by Delaware Representative Rich Collins at a Millsboro Town Hall meeting at Town Hall on August 7th.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thank you, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.